All right, so I got it all together now. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us for this introductory course into Team Flow Fundamentals. Team Flow Fundamentals is our first offering. It's an 8-week course that begins next week. Well, technically it begins right now with this introductory course that we wanted to make free and share. We're going to be doing an entire course overview. We're going to be getting into some of the bigger narratives and the stories. We're going to talk a little bit about the Institute, not much, and we're going to talk about how you can create more team flow with your teams and your projects. And so I'm really excited to dive right into that stuff. Let me start first with a little bit more background. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get going on the presentation. We actually are looking at a really interesting challenge, and I don't think we've nailed this yet, so my apologies, but hopefully that's part of what we will do together. And that is the positioning of team flow as the key catalyst to unlock our greatest human potential for collaborating together in the autonomous or in the AI age. And of course, we've got another thing going on here as well, which has been the remote work phenomenon, hybrid work, return to office, and all those other wonderful conversations that are going on, and how this all fits together. But I wanted to say that we are looking more broadly than team flow. But in my experience and looking at all of the different things that have come before, team flow and the model that Dr. Jeff Vandenhout has created explains the basics and the fundamentals and gives us a framework to navigate our discussions on team collaboration, our systems design, and how we actually work together and the sort of culture that we build to get there. So for me, team flow is sort of the North Star that we're trying to achieve. And in teams that can get to that state of flow, we have seen the correlation in Jeff's research and in our personal experience and a lot of other readings that correlates the characteristics that we'll talk about from the model with that peak performance, with actual results. So in many ways, team flow is sort of that proxy, that North Star for us to focus on. But there's a lot of other work that rolls up into making this possible. So while we're going to focus here in Team Flow Fundamentals course on Dr. Vandenhout's work and the related closer work, there's a lot of other books, there's a lot of other methods, there's a lot of other systems and tools that we will ultimately bring in to help improve our team performance, to solve some of the other challenges that we may be facing with our teams. But we're specifically have been reaching out to frustrated remote team managers with this initial course, because we would like to lean more into not just fully remote first companies, but decentralized teams. Teams that have an office in Atlanta and New York and LA and Saskatchewan or wherever it might be, and certain individuals who are working from home or perhaps working from anywhere around the world. And so that nature of the environment, as we'll discuss later, is one portion of it, but we wanted to focus this first stuff on team flow itself. Now, of course, we've mentioned AI several times. We will be getting into a little bit of artificial intelligence and how to use transcription tools and some other kind of practical sort of processes and rituals and systems. But the majority of our emphasis right now is on team flow so that we can better understand it. And in that way, you will be able to better adapt and apply this into your different situations. Before I go any further, just for those of you who don't know, the Institute, we are really, really focused on the idea that we can improve our greater well-being and prosperity by changing how we work together. And so we are a research institution, we're an academy for learning, and ultimately a guild for team flow facilitators. I'm very fortunate to have working with me Jamie Schwartz, who is a phenomenal brand therapist, among other things. He's just an amazing mensch as well. And I can't tell you enough about Jamie, but we've been working over the last almost 2 years now on common ideals and principles that have ultimately led us to team flow and then led us to Dr. Vandenhout and led us to doing these things. We're also joined by Jen McClure, who is former founder and head of research, among other things, for the Society for New Communications Research, who's helping us form our research programs and work with research partners. And then we were very fortunate to connect with Dr. Jeff Vandenhout, whose material is the source of this class, and not all those wonderful fast forwards that I just did by leaning on the keyboard. But Dr. Vandenhout, we've been working together now over the past several weeks, talking about the class, talking about the materials, and I've been diving deeper into understanding how he's applied it, how he's used the assessment tools, and also looking at reviewing right now his next paper, which will be his fifth, that he's waiting to get approval and translated into English. So I'm going to get to help him with that process, and we're going to get some early access to some of those research insights and be able to apply them and learn from them as we go. One thing here, I believe that the majority of people here in the Zoom are actually in the class already. If you're not, this is a sort of introduction to the class that we're offering. The price of that class is normally $995. Which includes an annual membership. But at the end of this presentation, we will be sharing a discount code for you to use that provides a substantial discount, and we believe makes it more accessible for a greater number of people. And hopefully in that vein, makes our first cohort together much more rich and engaging and useful for all of us to learn from each other, not just to learn from the materials. So one of the things that led us here and really gets to the heart of the remote angle is that I really believe that too many organizations changed how we work. Changed where they work, not how. And as a result of that, a lot of other problems with some of the reports coming out where employees claim that their productivity is up while the bosses and the corporations say that productivity is down. There's a mismatch here, and I've written about that earlier this week, and we've got a bunch of materials out there. And the whole mandate for return to office led us to a whole expansion of our thinking over the last 6 weeks that we'll share more about with you later. But some of the key principles that I really wanted to look at is the idea of working out loud and how important that is. In fact, in a recent article I read, an interview with Matt Mullenweg, where he referenced his company has a reading and writing culture. And I've been talking to him, Mullenweg and Automatic, if you're not familiar with it, is one of the first remote companies, remote first companies, I guess I should say. There's a great book written on it about working, what was it called? Working without your pants or something like that. So it's about the idea of working from home. And they explain some of their principles. Now, of course, since then, that was over 10 years ago, there's been a lot more written on it. But it is about that shift primarily in my mind. And in fact, reading that really struck me yesterday in recognizing that even though we're a small team and we're really a community more than a team at this point, although we're getting there, that I need to do more of that. And I hadn't been doing that. So, we're all learning and changing constantly. And I think that's part of the thrill of this whole thing. But what we really have to have is the ability to have a workspace to do that in, right? So what's happened as well is many companies haven't changed how they're actually engaging with those digital workspaces, and particularly in terms of running meetings and believing that collaborating is actually meeting. And it's not the same thing. But of course, we're checking in as well. And some companies have really found the way to have the right balance between manager and employee or labor or contractor, as the case may be. But many others have too many direct reports and are unable to do that. So they're not getting that sort of benefit, which is really kind of important now. And of course, how they're maintaining alignment, you can't do it by watching everyone's heads nods around the table or even on the screens. We have to find a deeper way to actually understand that. And the tools around Team Flow enable that. So I just wanted to discuss with you guys here, and I know a little bit of it, but I'm just wondering, after we switched here to the remote work of the pandemic, what changes, if any, did your managers or organizations implement to change how you work other than using Zoom or Google Meet or something like that. Is there anybody who has anything they can share in terms of changes that they actually made?
There's an interesting channel that kept showing up in our Slacks, Boss After Boss, which was the GSD channel, or Get Stuff Done channel. And it was basically a symptom of, well, stuff wasn't getting done. So we needed a channel just to focus on taking things to the finish line, because things would fall apart naturally before we got there.
Mm. Yeah. So there's a recognition of the challenge and then a point solution, as opposed to looking at the bigger thing. And that's fine, because we do need to put Band-Aids on sometimes before we can cure the disease. But we're looking at going more deeply into the body and curing the disease. Is there anyone else? So how about the opposite? Any other perspectives on, continuing to work as we did before, or what the consequences of that might have been?
Well, I mean, I think the pandemic has clearly shown that teams can be productive without being co-located in the same building. And I mean, it literally, my team was remote as it was. So I went from driving 45 minutes so I could sit and talk to people across the other side of the world to just sitting on my couch and talking to them across the world. And I mean, I feel like this push for the demand that some companies are making to have people in the office is, I mean, in some cases it's warranted if you're doing R&D for some sort of, new products. I get it. There's labs, you got to go in, you got to, develop a product. But there's plenty of roles that don't need to take up the real estate. And that, ultimately, I feel like the companies that are really pushing for it are the ones that have bought the real estate and are like, okay, we can't just flip it, so we might as well, at least in the meantime, force everybody to come back.
Yeah. Stephanie?
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen is that our company definitely went to a work from home culture during the pandemic. The challenge is, though, that a lot of the people don't know how to work effectively remotely and how to best collaborate remotely. And like what you were just saying, I also had been working remotely myself before the pandemic started. So I'm really good at it, but a lot of the people I work with are not. And so that's another challenge, is how do we train people? How do we get people to learn new skills to how to collaborate virtually?
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of those tools and systems and training and investing in that training that needs to happen. And it's a bigger problem than that, though, because there is still a lower sense of general digital literacy in the general population. And even some of the workers you might expect who need to be technically savvy are not all that technically savvy, at least not to the point of being their own IT support person, which is what working from home or working from anywhere requires. And that has resulted in a number of new services to be stood up, a number of new help desks, but like many, not widely available yet, and the expense is something that organizations haven't invested in too far. But there's a lot of things that we can do that are more simple, and we really do need to get back to the basics and look at the fundamentals. So with this course, the course is Team Flow Fundamentals, but the promise is to transform your remote team in 8 weeks. It's more than a course. What we're going to be doing together is having more conversations about specific issues where we can share stories and learn from each other. I'm going to have that very focused inside these classes on the different topics that we have. But more importantly than that, we're going to actually start by giving you access to a Team Flow assessment that you can run with your team. And so we'll set that up if you have an existing team that you want to do that with. And we will use that assessment together in the course as a sort of roadmap for your experience here in the course, so that you can not only learn about the fundamentals, but you can see how they practically impact the people on the teams and your ability to collaborate together. And hopefully in that process, make small little adjustments or introduce concepts with your teams or different rituals to be able to actually shift their ability to collaborate together and improve upon it. What we're also going to do here is, of course, look at the rituals and protocols and practices that lead to some of these. And we're going to talk about some of those actually here today as well, because this is a walkthrough of the week by week course at a higher level, of course, because we don't have time to do the whole thing, and trying to, again, put it into some better context so that we can actually improve the engagement and the communications and the collaborations of your teammates. I'm gonna run through this very quickly because it makes a lot of sense and should be really simple. What we're really looking at here by focusing on achieving team flow and bringing in the framework from Dr. Van den Hout's team flow model is to enhance our collaboration and increase our productivity. There's a whole other conversation we'll have about productivity, but for now, know we can improve upon it. What we also get, though, is improved job satisfaction and a greater sort of sense of fulfillment from it. And that leads to that. Did I do improved engagement twice? No, I didn't. All right. We do improved engagement, which is the amount of enrollment that somebody has. Now, we actually have a couple of podcasts that we're releasing here shortly on the Song of Significance by Seth Godin. And Seth, in that book, talks about the idea of enrollment, that an individual enrolls into something. It's something that they want to do. It's not something that they have to do. And how a company can help their workers sing a song of significance, which makes the job more meaningful and fulfilling. And very much that book talks about this sort of world and is almost a manifesto for what we're trying to accomplish using the team flow framework. And so we'll be talking about that and referencing that quite frequently as well. And in fact, that's one of our required readings, if you will, for the whole of this course. So why team flow? Well, we've talked about that a little bit, but let's just go to the basics for those of you who don't know. Mihail has actually talked about this for some time. This book has been out for almost 20 years, if not a little more by this point. And in fact, over the past couple of months, as I've been talking to more people, I've run into more athletic and celebrity coaches who are using flow as defining the sorts of states that they want to get their actors and their musicians and their sports athletes into, so that they understood this stuff immediately. And it's this idea of being so completely immersed in an activity that you lose all sense of time. You may have also heard it called in the zone. We also have this concept of satori that I really appreciate from Eastern culture. But it really is associated with peak individual performance and personal satisfaction, fulfillment, and enjoyment. But in the context of a team, this is a shared experience, leading to heightened collaboration and productivity. And as you'll see, the conditions are that lead to this in the team flow, hopefully to you, make as much sense as they do to me. In this book, or in this paper here, and several of the other papers that we're using as the basis of our course, which you'll all have PDFs of and access to, as well as access to an AI to actually make queries of the PDF papers that Jeff has released, so that we can use that and leverage that and get a few more insights out of it. And also, of course, answer questions on your own that we aren't able to do in class or that we don't get to. But what we're looking at is the prerequisites that lead to it. And let's just go ahead and try to get to a understanding of what it is, though, before we get into the prerequisites. Hey, we get to see an ad. My apologies for that. Where's my volume? Fit any lifestyle. All right. So hopefully you can see this here. Are you able to see the screen and the soccer players here?
Yes.
All right. So this is really a phenomenal way to understand team flow. And in fact, earlier this week, I wrote a really simple post using this soccer as a metaphor for flow itself. And it's at this point where there is just such a sense of cohesion that they can anticipate what their teammates are going to do and in real time adapt to it. Now, look, there's planning here, right? There's the plan of how are we going to execute on these free kicks so that we can actually score. But then there's this sort of stuff, which may also be planned. But as Mike Tyson said, all plans are great until you get punched in your face. So when we're here in the middle of it, being able to adapt and continue to move and have that drive and that connection to each other, it's really quite special. And it's a very unique sort of feeling, right? So my question to you guys as we pause here is if you could share any time you've actually felt when you've experienced flow. Is there a particular memory of where you felt it and you remember not only the feeling of it, the exultation, but can equate it to the higher results, the better results that you had?
Yeah, I think I can, if no one else has anything, I
Please,
can
Mark.
just take the first stab at this. So at my most recent role at a semiconductor company, I was basically brought in to help run a web team, to build the web team and then run it. And we had a huge backlog of tickets, a lot of frustration on the business side because the team just was too small to get the demand, take care of the demand. There was a 3-person team before I got there. So I essentially had to quickly identify what the issues were and bring in the right resources. So bringing in developers, bringing in QA specialists, and bringing in DevOps folks so that everything didn't roll up and be the responsibility of like one person. So we got to the point where we were estimating our sprints, working with the business, letting them know, how many story points we could accomplish per sprint and so on. And we got a pretty good flow where, developers would do their thing, hand it off to QA would do their thing, send it back or send it through to have the DevOps guy get it ready for release and so on. So there was a good we had like a good synergy to use a term from like it was popular in the 90s, right? But like that's essentially what it was. It was kind of like like those soccer players running down the field, kicking the ball over to the next guy, and him kicking it over all the way until the goal.
So let me ask you a couple of things about that, and to wrap up. So what it sounds like is that you were defining it as the fact that the workflow kept moving forward, and you didn't have a lot of friction or tension in it, right? You didn't have conflict, or everyone understood what they did. How do you think you got to that place, or what was it that equates that situation to flow for you?
Well, when roles are clearly defined and expectations are defined early and upfront, as well as making sure that you function as a team and you lead your team and establish kind of like the framework for what's expected, and you kind of like also like leading by example. And it doesn't mean that I'm getting in and developing and doing QA and doing DevOps myself, but I have an understanding of what those roles require, and I can at least help to massage things along if needed, as well as doing whatever required interference would be needed to be if for instance somebody misses the ball and something gets dropped, and then I can at least work with stakeholders to reset what the expectations are.
Awesome. That's a really great explanation of this across, and obviously very much matches with a lot of the stuff we're talking about Team Flow. Does anyone else have another state of flow, maybe not work related, that they could share?
I think I have to jump on top of what the other Jamie said. Which is that kind of sense of I lose the mine whenever we're handing off back and forth, I can tell the difference between when my team and I are talking and engaging, but I want to share my thought. I want to share my thought. And there's a distinct difference between that and ours. This is ours. There's still possession in your head, but we share that together while we're talking. And you can feel the difference because the handoffs between are yes and without thinking yes and. Which is, if you ever think yes and, you're doing that consciously, you're like, yes, oh, I mean yes and, or you're like, but no, I mean yes, you keep having to correct yourself. But there's a thing that happens in that team flow point where the yes and is just natural when you're flowing with that. The only other time not work related is, it's frankly sports. I never was blessed to have musical talent because I always look at a jazz band going, and you bask in their team flow. But there's a couple times with basketball where everybody knows. It's that same thing as the soccer of was the total soccer is the term.
That's awesome. Hey, Mark, I'm wondering if you could do us a favor of sharing the experience you have on stage when you're in the zone, when you get flow with your band, and what that like feels like. Is there any way you could try to find some words to describe that feeling?
Yeah. You as a musician, and when you're on stage, there is a connection that you have with whoever you're playing with, and it's an unspoken, there really aren't even words for it. And there's a place where you can go where you're kind of working on muscle memory as opposed to thinking about what you're supposed to do. I have found that when I'm in the zone and then I realize I'm in the zone and then I start thinking about, okay, what's coming up next, that's when I'll make a mistake. If I let myself kind of just fall like mentally and spiritually into what I'm doing, it kind of it works itself out. And then, you have these 3 or 4 other guys that you're working with in concerts. And, when you're all 4 of you are in the zone, it's like a powerful thing. The challenge is what happens is like one guy is worried about his technical stuff, and so he's like not in the zone. So he's playing, but then things aren't working out. He's getting frustrated, and like another guy will and another guy will kind of pick up on that energy, and it could potentially also affect his performance. So it's kind of like you got to be in like almost like a Zen state to where you like don't care. Well, I don't want to say don't care, but you're not concerned with what everybody else is doing. You're just trusting that they're doing it. And then you're just like letting yourself go through the motions without like focusing too hard on it, because when you focus too hard, you're going to screw up.
Yeah, and that's again one of those reasons about being prepared and having the planning and some of the other bit. But I really appreciate that you actually led into another really important sort of insight, which is that we as individuals on teams need to learn our difference between our responsibilities and our concerns. And as Mark was explaining, if one of his bandmates is struggling with the pedals or his audio or something else, if he ends up getting overly concerned about those problems, you'll drop out of that state of flow because you're no longer being present, being in that energy itself, being in that invisible force field or those connections that bind us together. We're actually stepping out of it in order to put our attention somewhere else, as opposed to what are we doing in this moment, which is jamming. And it might be a higher thought of putting on the best performance we possibly can. It might be really like knocking it out with this song. There might be other ways of versing that or focusing that linguistically. But the feeling of it is literally one of being present with each other, safe, and doing something exciting that has all this chemical release in your brain to feel great about it. And those chemicals actually feed our ability to perform better. But when something breaks us up, when some friction or interruption, some form of dysfunction comes into play, that is where we step out of the zone. And as you all might know from individual experiences, there's a lot of times, unfortunately, where we have some dysfunction that's coming in from one particular negative team member. And that one negative team member can actually destroy the whole culture and get everyone out of the zone and get everyone out of flow. And that's one of the reasons why we need to, understand where we should be at together as a team, and the need to focus on growth mindsets and focus in positive psychology instead of allowing the encroachment of that negative all the time. We got more to talk about on that. That's a big area of exploration, and we're going to spend some time on that actually next week to get into that a little bit more. Moving forward, I guess now's the time to probably introduce the team flow model itself from Dr. Vandenhout. Now, this is a really straightforward version of it. It's just blocking and tackling. We're going to get into a more advanced version of it that'll help make it more accessible. But what I really want to point out to you here is the power and the need for that collective ambition. Now, I say need, but it really probably more desire, because in certain environments, based on who you're able to hire and different market conditions and where your company is at and what you're doing, getting everyone driven by that common purpose, by that collective ambition, might be a little bit challenging. The good news is there are ways to reinforce that and to rise that to the top of people's consciousness so that we can make it a more regular consideration. And by bringing it up and putting our work next to that higher purpose more regularly, people will start to make those associations and start to lead to that. Now, when we go to collective ambition, I'm sorry, I was in the wrong window. This is where I was really excited about Dr. Vandenhout's work. I built a software company some time ago called Aligned, and I was thinking that the thing that would solve for all of our work problems was just getting people aligned. Well, I was slightly off center. You can see we've got some alignment in the model, so there is some alignment that's needed, and there are things we can do to create that and sustain it. But where Jeff went to with this was the idea of a collective ambition, an intrinsic motivator, a drive, a force that drives us to accomplish this common purpose together. And it's that inner drive that creates the enrollment that leads to the participation that generates team flow. And so one possible way you might envision this is if you've ever seen an Amish farm raising. We've got hundreds of people literally come together and build the barn. In fact, one of the recipes that I read on this was like how to make a beef stew for 300 Amish people building a barn, right? So, I mean, we're looking at big stuff and everyone's involved in it in the entire village, and it's really something else. Another place is when the queen bee dies or is about to die and they have to go off and find a new hive. People go off all over the local area. I think that it's something like thousands of places that they go, different scout bees, and they all come back and they share what they learned, and somehow one of them comes back and says, I found the perfect thing, and they all believe them. And the people who went out, the 1,000 bees or whatever that went out and found a place they could go, but that wasn't chosen. That wasn't wasted work. That was all part of the work. And so there's a recognition that they're not feeling let down because it's not theirs. They're happy because they contributed to finding what wasn't the right one. And there's a whole bunch to unpack in that, which I believe is why Seth Godin really likes using that metaphor and that story for explaining some of this. And we'll be talking a little more scientifically about that as well. But another place where this shows up is in the kitchen. If you've ever been in a really top restaurant, we can see it in the back of the house and the front of the house. In fact, the front of the house crews that have that service all dialed in, the difference it makes in the service that you have, in the experience that you have with that restaurant. And in many ways, the manager is the person responsible for crafting that. And if you're in a restaurant where that sort of service is swirling around you and your water is constantly filled and you feel that like you've got everything you need because you're not sitting around going, where is that person? Where is that person? Well, somebody else comes by and takes care of you. That's a front of house staff that's in flow. But it's that manager creating the conditions for it and continuing to align everyone and facilitate the clarity and ensuring that everyone knows that they're a team and creating the incentives even for the tip pool sharing, so that it is actually aligned to the team, not to an individual star performer who can be incentivized to do a lot of other negative behaviors along the way in order to maximize their own personal revenue at the expense of others. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there as well, but it's another great example. Of course, we see it in the natural world as well. Another example here with ants in terms of how they build their nests and how they also manage to get around the world, carrying 200 times their weight or whatever that multiple is, but in ways that they help one another and they're collective. So one of the frameworks we're going to explore, and we're not going to go too deep into this today, though, is on the managerial side of this. And understanding it from the planning and management perspective. And it really is about the prerequisites first, the foundation that we need to build on, the conditions, the ongoing environmental factors, the culture really that we're looking at. And then it's a matter of how do we create those conditions? What are the tactics? What are the frameworks? What are the interventions we do in order to get the right conditions in place so that we can collaborate in that way, that we can collaborate safely, that we can collaborate effectively, that we have communications clarity, and that ultimately everyone knows what they're supposed to do. Well, how do we accomplish that, particularly in a bigger team, right? So this is the bigger model that I was or a more detailed model that I was talking about earlier that I wanted us to come back to, and we're spending a lot of time with this, but what it breaks down to in helping to understand it a little bit better is this new kind of version where we kind of box this out into three areas. And this is the direction, this is the positive and supportive work environment, and this is clear and challenging task division. Or as I'm talking about it now, direction, role clarity, and culture. Which really means the same thing. So we'll be actually working together on some of that in terms of what is the right language for that. Does that make the most sense? Does that resonate? How should we be talking about this? And because we're working with Jeff, we have a chance to shape some of the future primary work that he's putting out there. And of course, get his feedback on a lot of that stuff. Now, those 6 rectangles in yellow, those are really the only conditions that we can shape. And the lines between them reflect the relationships. So that when we have, let's say, mutual commitment in the upper left, together with an audacious common goal, that is what leads to holistic focus. When we have aligned personal goals with that common goal, that gives us a sense of unity that makes us feel like we're in it together. Going down to the bottom left, a safe climate, psychological safety, together with open communications where we are communicating freely with one another, leads to a sense of mutual trust. And in the right corner, high skill integration, and not only skill integration that comes from the role clarity, but also ego integration, together with open communications, lets us feel and hopefully see a sense of joint progress. And it's all of that together that supports that collective ambition to allow us to achieve a state of team flow and really not only produce the best results we possibly can, but in my view, hopefully create the best job you've ever had, which is a really audacious goal that a lot of the team science consultants and collaboration coaches have been focused on. So before I go further, because this is kind of the first time I've talked through this with some of you, I just want to pause here and see if there's any questions or any other additional insights to share if looking at the model through this lens, as opposed to the more two-dimensional, black and white version.
I think what's for context, what might help is the top with direction is an alternative way of looking at that is belief in the organization that you're working with. So where that mutual commitment and audacious common goal and aligned personal goals come together, we're all here because we believe in what this company is doing and the mission of what the company wants to do and how that applies to this specific team mission. I don't think that's holistic, as in, I think there are other things besides belief in the organization that could go in direction. And I think direction is the best word to holistically cover the top. But one way of looking at it, especially when we're talking about when we work for companies, would be that top would also be described that way.
Yeah. And to that point, that's where purpose-driven organizations have an advantage in achieving this already. Denise, did you have something to share? Or okay, gotcha. Okay. A lot more to go on in this. One of the other interesting things that I've learned, I've mentioned the team flow assessment a couple of times. We've now delivered it a few times, and I've spoken with Dr. Van out about this a bit. There's an interesting element in looking at those relationships, let's say, between mutual commitment and audacious common goal and the holistic focus, so that we can actually, through the assessment, score ourselves and the team against this model, and in so doing, identify areas of weaknesses and strengths to help prioritize the sorts of interventions we have. So the lines that are going between the ellipses or the ellipticals, ovals, and the rectangles, they also let us understand the dynamics of how they play into that. And I kind of walked through a light version of that, but there's a lot more depth we'll be going to in that model and the interplay between the conditions and the sense and feeling and sort of visible holistic focus, unity, trust, and progress that we're looking at. So very excited to explore more of those and to build out greater mappings of what to do if there is low mutual trust, but open communications. So there's all sorts of different variables, one to be high, one to be low, right? That sort of stuff. So we're going to get a lot deeper in that. And in so doing, mapping the interventions to different situations together. So the course itself is what I'm going to wrap on here. There's a couple of things afterwards, but I want to walk through the 8 weeks ahead. There's a whole bunch of ways we've approached this over time, and I just want to be upfront with you now about the decision here and what we're doing. I very much want you to be able to apply this as we go. It's very much my desire to learn from you in this process as much as it is to share what we've learned and put the materials into a way that you can apply them. But I really want you to be able to put it into the world as quickly as possible. So I was looking at, do we make this fundamentals more practical application or less? And at the end of the day, as I approach this decision, in a somewhat admittedly selfish sort of concern, I realized that we really need to dial in the fundamentals before we can even go into that. So the ability to spend time with you over the next 8 weeks, 8.5, 9 weeks, whatever that ends up being, that we do this over, given the holiday. I'm hoping to get as much out of this as you are, and I'm looking for us to together lay the foundation for those who follow. And so getting the fundamentals down and having that material together and being able to build on that is the building blocks of the Institute itself. And so I've really focused on, we're going to go into another deeper discussion next week on collective ambition and the personal goals and a lot of the other directional stuff at the heart of Team Flow. But then we're going to start going through the 6 different conditions on a weekly basis. And then the last week, we're going to go really intense on sustaining or creating and sustaining flow and how do we actually put that into practice. Throughout, though, as I mentioned, each week, as we go deeply into a given module or one of the conditions that we have, will be a chance for you to go back to the team flow assessments that you get with your teams and analyze that particular condition. Perhaps design an intervention and try it. We're happy to help do that with you. But the course material itself is going to be, here are the fundamentals, and then beyond that, it's going to be putting it into practical motion for everyone. So the first week, the power of purpose and collective ambition. I'm not going to get into too much on each of these. I'm going to talk about one individual component to it. But we do know that people will work more effectively with that common goal, with that collective ambition, with that internal drive and the mental drive. And so how do we do that? Well, one of the ways that we do that is to actually take the time to reflect on it. Another simple way to do that is to actually bring it up as we're doing the work. What I discovered a long time ago, one of Tony Robbins' courses was on rapid planning. And that rapid planning method had you break down what are all the things you need to do for the day, how can you get leverage from other people to do that stuff, and then more importantly, what greater purpose did this move forward? What greater objective or outcome or result? So the idea of being like a leading company in the field or providing the best customer service possible. All sorts of different ways we can set those different objectives. But the idea being that when we're talking about some activity we need to do, to always connect it with the more important, more valuable, higher end results that is laddering up to. Connect it with the purpose behind the activity, not just the activity. And I'll tell you, I had that earlier today as I was looking at editing a whole bunch of transcripts and having to spend like hours going through editing transcripts to pull out what I needed, and being frustrated and procrastinating it a little bit because I was like, oh man, I don't want to just, it's like photocopying 8,000 copies, right? It's like, I don't want to do this. But as soon as I connected it back to, no, I'm going to be pulling out insights that I'm going to be able to use to help people understand this better. As soon as I put that back into my mind and made that part of the focus of what I was doing, it literally just dissipated that procrastination feeling, and I was able to turn the switch and just go and do it. So when we're able to make it not just something that's present, something that we share, but something that is consciously in our workflows and in our rituals of how we talk with one another, that's one of the most important ways to bring that in and to sustain it over time. As we move into week 2 and the following weeks, I actually spent some time talking with Jeff about how do we prioritize these, or how do we put them in order so that they build on each other? And so the format of the next 6 courses is based on that conversation, and it starts with audacious team goals. And the reason why is because we experience it together as a group. It can make it more visceral. It can be more visible in that way. And having some stretch goals, as they're often called, that aren't impossible, but that do require us to go beyond where we're normally comfortable, is that bit that makes us perform our best. There's a whole bunch of psychology behind it to prove that. But it's in those situations when we're stretched a little bit, but feeling safe together, and we have that clarity of what the goals are, where we're able to really perform beyond expectations. Week 3, we're talking about aligned personal goals and how do we ladder up beyond those first 2 components. Because when we're aligned individually with those goals, you have that sense of ownership. And in fact, this is how I came into a bit of this. When talking with Jamie, when we first met, I had just discovered the concept of co-elevation. And now all my life I've been saying, if you're better off, I'm better off. And that's just kind of my communitarian sort of view on believing that our collective power is better than my individual power. And anyways, a whole bunch of other stuff. But co-elevation is this similar idea, and it's just a little more defined by a few different books. But it is that sense of co-ownership at the heart of it. And it is that sense that what I say matters. I contribute meaningfully to this. And, you know, the key is, again, have we looked at them? This is where the one-on-ones are really powerful. And when they're used properly, can really ensure that alignment. And also, if we have concern and empathy and an interest in the well-being and development of the individuals that we're working with, we want what's best for them. So sometimes we can actually see where their personal goals don't fit the team's goals or the organization's goals. And part of the conversation might be for them to go on and pursue something else. Now, that's another really big part of this. And again, we talk about pulling in a lot of other books. The one for facilitating difficult conversations is definitely another one we need to look at. But when we can get to a point, as we'll talk about shortly, where we feel a little bit safer and we have that trust, those difficult conversations become a lot easier. And, once we have, I'm going to go back really quickly through the headlines. Once we have our collective ambition clear and a clear purpose, and we've established clear, audacious team goals, and we've investigated and determined that my personal goals are aligned with the team goals, then that's when we can add in, oh, I went the wrong way. There we go. Then that's where the power of open communications and the systems for working out loud, for being able to have visibility into other people's progress, into where things stand with a given project, being able to understand the expectations that were clearly established and where they're being met and where they're not, and even being able to raise those issues is really important. So how do we encourage open communication and dialogue beyond modeling it? Well, that's a little more tricky, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to spend a bit of time on this. There's a lot of other individual issues that come to this. People are introverts, some people are extroverts. And in fact, one of my hardest lessons over the years was learning that the people who aren't speaking out might have the most valuable insights or opinion to offer. So another reason to be more inclusive in the way we facilitate our collaboration, to ensure that that person who's silent can actually have space to step into and share what it is that they feel, think, or see with regards to the question or the discussion at the table at hand. And that's just one of many different ways that we can do it. Of course, one of the other ways is about how do we remove our judgments from each other, a lot more difficult sort of stuff. And in fact, all of this stuff is kind of difficult, which is why not a lot of people are doing it exceptionally well. Besides the factor of money and time and the constraints of not thinking we have enough time to consider this, to do it properly. But recognizing that when we don't, what is this thing? That when we fail to plan, we plan to fail. Well, a part of that, I believe, is the reflections, not just the after action reviews, but the after meeting reviews, the after discussion reviews, and where we can find ways to better recognize the things that people did right instead of accentuate what they did wrong. That is one step towards encouraging more people to step up. But of course, we still do need to find a way to instill constructive criticism to add to and shift the direction that we're headed. And that is a little bit harder. So again, we'll be talking more deeply about some of the different situations we enter where that becomes necessary and how do we do that. The same thing here with psychological safety. It is that sense of trust. I think I first really looked at it in earnest with the Project Aristotle stuff in Google studying teamwork. And there's another tremendous piece of work and content that I want to include as part of our course curriculum and reading to make sure that you understand it. I'm working on getting copies of it right now because it seems that their website with all the materials is now in Japanese only. A whole other interesting sort of situation as things evolve over time. But how do you create a psychologically safe environment where people can take risks and share their ideas? Well, a lot of that comes down to how do we view failure? And do we expect it as part of our ongoing processes or not? And how do we even perhaps celebrate failure? But that's only one of several different vectors to come in and how we create psychological safety. The other one that's really important is interpersonal connectedness, to actually have some sort of basis for a relationship with the other team members. And that's also a part of what we'll be talking about as well. And of course, as we're moving in towards the other components here, that high skill integration is really very important. And it is role clarity very much. But it's also about understanding, as Mark shared earlier, that he doesn't need to know everything that everyone on the team needs to do. He needs to know how to have those things done so he can find the right people to do it. And then if we have those right people to do those tasks and to do those jobs, then we can have our system of actually managing our teamwork, managing our collaboration, our communications together, that will allow us to do that sort of smooth handoff from one to another, and everything's going to be in the proper place. And if we have open communications and we deliver something upstream in our workflows that's not right, the individual can hopefully come back and talk with us and work together on solving for how do we make this into a format that you need? What do I need to do differently where the individual teammates can have those conversations instead of it being in a one-on-one with team managers? Mutual commitment. I'm sorry, I think I already had this, but if I didn't, let me go ahead and do it again. This is really about the commitment to each other. And it's different than the goals. It's actually about that sort of understanding that we are there, we're enrolled, we are showing up when we need to, that we deliver what we say we're going to deliver, that we do what we say we're going to do, and that if we're not able to, that we communicate about it and we're able to readjust expectations or go more deeply into defining the expectations on the commitment that we have. In fact, that's where one of the first things we really need to do is enter into commitments, not only mindfully, but intentionally. While I was exploring commitments and alignment, I had some really fascinating conversations with some German colleagues. And in essence, Holger said to me that that's his biggest problem with Westerners. That in Germany, people won't commit to anything or say anything unless they're certain 100% that they're going to do it, and that they can do it, that they understand what's going to be done. And if they say it, it's their word and they're going to do it. Whereas in the US, a lot of people will use soft language to get out of making clear and concise commitments to each other because of a lot of things that I don't need to get into now. But it's a really fascinating sort of view. And again, we were very fortunate with Diska's contributions on looking at this from Eastern culture to understand how the Eastern culture looks at it slightly differently as well in terms of their view of collectivism and their approach towards not wanting to necessarily be leaders. So it's important to keep that kind of broader view open. And get a chance to understand different cultures and how they approach it, because different people on our teams are going to come from these different cultural or personality type backgrounds that are different. So being able to understand how do we get to that point of a commitment through clarity, through an understanding, and then through the follow through is a really important of achieving team flow, because it's that bit that if Mark was standing there and one of his bandmates was playing around with the pedals, the foot pedals and the sound, if he knew that person knew what they were doing and had the confidence and had that feeling of safety with them, it wouldn't rise up in his mind to be something of an expressed concern. It would be something that would be noticed and go, it's going to be taken care of. And so it doesn't have to interrupt or distract the flow. Moving into week 8. The closing, we're going to wrap it all up and pull it together into achieving and sustaining flow. We're going to talk about not only the positive, productive work environment, the culture, we're going to introduce the culture plan, which I've shared with several of you already, but we're going to go more specific into an actual plan. At that point, we're also going to start working with the Team Flow Canvas, that Dr. Vandenhout has created, and we'll talk about a couple of other tools beyond the assessment. And we'll also spend some time looking at how we do a team flow assessment to measure up front. And hopefully at that point, having done a few things with one of your teams that you're working with, we'll be able to go back and get another team flow assessment with new measures so that you can look at the contrast between when you started and when you started adding more mindfulness to their ability to collaborate together. And of course, in that, we'll also spend time in the final week talking to you specifically. I will spend time specifically talking to you about what those changes mean, about what you experienced, sort of an exit interview for the class with me, which isn't an interview more than it is a practical consultation session of how to think about applying it and doing more to get more from the course in your practical application with your team. And so it's how do we bring it all together, and then how do we actually run teams and flow on an ongoing basis. So I think I screwed up on a couple of those slides earlier, but in terms of the numbering, but the content is still the same content, so my apologies for that. Where I want to go to here as we're wrapping up, and we are wrapping up, the future of human work in the age of artificial intelligence belongs to teams that can solve complex problems, pivot amid ambiguity, and create value through deeper collaboration. This goes back to the beginning and what I was talking about, which is really so much is going on right now, so much disruption, and it's really hard to make sense of a lot of it. So hard that over the last couple of weeks, just trying to put together materials to explain this story, I've launched into almost migraines with the amount of headaches and stomach aches and other things, because while I have an ability to stand in multiple futures simultaneously, I still don't have the word to describe what it is I'm feeling and seeing in the future of human work enhanced by artificial intelligence and all the other factors that I'm concerned with there. So really, that again is one of the reasons why we're focused on team flow, because we see team flow as the key that unlocks the potential for human work, because it deals with how you and I work together, not necessarily the resources available, although that will come into play and that might mitigate or enhance our ability to do things. You know, it's more important about how you and I work shoulder to shoulder and screen to screen, and having that collective ambition driving us, holding us together, and having clarity in our communications and directions, having clarity in our responsibilities, and having an overall culture and system that is one rooted in positivity, growth mindset for our ongoing development, and the belief in the potential of us together to do great things. So leadership at the heart of this. So this is really what kind of drives us, and this is what we're shooting for out of this course, is understanding how to bring this gift to the people we work with, so that we can not only produce better results with our work, but that we can enjoy greater prosperity and well-being in our lives, even with ambiguity and uncertainty, even with really complex problems in front of us, and to have an array of tools that will help us get through whatever blockades are put in front of us, to solve for whatever problems arise between us interpersonally, and ultimately achieve a state of team flow that produces the best possible results we can. What will it take for smart people to work better together? Trusting environment, more empathy, team intelligence, and creating the conditions for team flow, which will be the focus of the course, but all of these other things are a big integral part of it. Simple steps to start. I'll let you come back to this afterwards, giving the timing. I will share the deck with you right afterwards via email, so you'll have access to that on Google Slides. And really, you know, this is what we're talking about. If we really want to change our results and our ability to produce better outcomes, we can change the culture in which we work. And we have a plan to do that starts with why, building on the great work of Simon Sinek. So this will also be part of the sustaining component of it. Not all organizations are big enough to do a full exercise in building a culture plan that enables flow along the lines that we're talking about. But if it's a simple framework that you can apply, I can tell you I've used it with a small business that is 2 people. And getting the clarity around this, accepting what you're not doing as well as what you are, and how you're going to go about doing it and what matters. Those conversations and planning and foundation building were invaluable for this particular person to see what it could be as he started considering bringing in his external contractors as part of the team and reading them in on these other aspects of the workflow, of the mission, vision, values, of how we're working, of where we're working, and when we're working together. A lot more to talk about in here, which is a whole nother set of courses. And we're going to skip this because you've seen some of this, and we're going to go to it for later. What I do want to point out is that in the back of the deck, there is links to the 5 webinars that we have conducted already that go deeper on all these materials. If you want to look at it more or want to go through that, happy to continue to answer questions about it. So if you comment on any of these, or you have a question as you look at any of these and see it, please do ask the questions. I'm happy to provide more insights as we can, but they're out there for you to go deeper. What we have now for the Team Flow Fundamentals is a payoff for the course. For those of you who have attended or see this webinar on recording, we have a code for you to use called In the Zone that'll provide you $700 off the price of the course, and will essentially make the course available to you for $295 instead of $995. And we kick off next week. So you have up until next Wednesday morning to sign up. That would be great to see you there. And if you just go to bit.ly Team Flow Fundamentals, capital TFF there in the middle, you'll be able to get to the course and enroll in it. And with that wrapped up going through the materials and providing the introduction to the whole course, and would love to answer any more questions we have in the time remaining, or any other shares that you would like to do for helping us all learn from your experiences.